And welcome back to the Football Outsiders Fantasy Show. I'm your host, Scott Spratt, a writer for Football Outsiders, joined every Tuesday by Derrik Klassen, scouting expert for Football Outsiders. Derrik, I hope you enjoyed your little Thanksgiving holiday, but we are back to the fantasy football waiver wire grind. How's it going, man?
Not so bad. We at least got one pretty good Thanksgiving game, despite none of them looking that good. So, I'll take it.
Absolutely. And I'll say we're kind of at the point of the year where we're running out of runway for some of the speculative type of fantasy pickups to really have a chance to make an impact for you in the fantasy playoffs. So we've pared our list down a little bit today from 12 normally to just 8 players that we'll focus on. So maybe get a little bit shorter from here on out. But I'll say, too, since we have Derrik and we have his scouting expertise to rely on, we're going to do what we've done with some other skill positions and look at the rookie tight end class as best we can. We kind of scraped the bottom of the barrel to come up with a few of those guys to talk about, but we'll get to that in a bit. But before we get started with the Week 13 waiver wire, let me mention that FO Plus is on sale for 99 cents a week for annual subscriptions right now. It's a limited time offer to get our stats, analysis, fantasy, and betting info. So don't miss out on that. Head to footballoutsiders.com/subscribe or follow the link in the description of the show to learn more. Derrik, let's get started with, I guess, probably the biggest of the fantasy moves here. It's Alexander Mattison, running back for the Minnesota Vikings. There were a couple of top 5 type of fantasy running backs that got injured last week, but I think Mattison is pretty clearly the backup handcuff that you really want to add from a fantasy perspective. I'm suggesting a 100% FAB bid here and kind of relying on the basic analysis that he had 32 touches in both weeks 3 and 5 when Dalvin Cook missed time previously with an ankle injury. This time it's a separated shoulder that could cost him a couple of weeks. Do you feel any differently about that? And what are your thoughts on Mattison, the player? Is this just sort of a short-term thing, or do you think in the long term he has the chance to develop into a real fantasy impact player, even when he has like maybe his own team in the future?
I kind of have concerns about him being that kind of player. I think he's like a perfectly good number 2. And I think, when your starter goes down, he's good enough. I think his vision is generally good enough. He runs with pretty good balance. But like, to me, the biggest difference between what Cook provides and what Mattison provides is I think a lot of the runs when they get bounced to the edge, Cook is a lot better. I think he's just faster. I think he's more agile in space like that. And I think Cook is just more explosive. So that's kind of the things that Cook can give you, because he's obviously a better player, that Mattison doesn't quite do. I think Mattison can do, if you block up 5 yards, he can get you 5 yards pretty consistently. But I think he kind of lacks a lot of the dynamic traits that you would want out of like a legit number 1 back.
So, I mean, if speed is the thing that Madison's missing, that I think the obvious follow-up would be the rookie Kenny Nwangwu, who's what? I think he's taken 2 kickoff returns for touchdowns this season, something that basically never happens in the modern NFL game anymore. It seems like he has tons of speed. Is there any way the Vikings could maybe work him in a little bit more offensively? He really has been a special teams pretty much only player so far this season, and I didn't know if you had any visions of this maybe being more of a split, since Cook is going to miss more than an odd week or 2 here, right?
I think it would be kind of worth exploring, especially with like, if they can scrape into the playoffs. I mean, I think this offense is going to need a little bit more firepower than they have right now to be able to like actually contest with some of the top NFC teams. So I think it would be interesting to try to get him into the mix. I don't think it's going to be like fantasy relevant over the next few weeks, but I think, like you mentioned, like what he's done as a kickoff guy is pretty insane. I mean, he's like legit track star speed. That dude can fly.
Yeah. So we're starting to get some questions in on our YouTube channel. By the way, we're live Monday through Friday, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. You can watch us and ask us questions on YouTube. Also follow along on Twitch or Twitter or Facebook, whatever it is your preferred platform. We love to have the questions. We'll hold these till the end of the show, the like start and sit type questions, the trade type questions, so we can kind of run through these waiver wire options. I guess the comparison and contrast here, Derrik, is with the Panthers situation, because they lost Christian McCaffrey. He's going back on IR, which means he's done for the season with another ankle injury. So I guess you have a little bit more of a definitive timeline where you're like, with Cook, you're not sure whether he's going to miss 2 weeks or maybe miss 4 weeks. Could kind of be anything in that range. But with the Panthers, I think there's a little bit less certainty about the players behind him. I'm suggesting Chuba Hubbard as the best waiver wire option, but I'm saying more of a 16% FAB bid. What are your thoughts on him and the fact that maybe Amir Abdullah has gotten a little bit more involved as a pass catcher in recent weeks? Is this more of a split workload, or do you think it's going to kind of shake out more similarly to what we expect with the Vikings?
I would still probably expect Hubbard to get a majority of the shares. I don't even think he's like a particularly great player. He's a ridiculous athlete. Like when he gets north and south, he can be really, really explosive, but I don't think he sees the game particularly well right now. And I think that's why Like with when Christian McCaffrey is your running back, every kind of run is open. You can run outside zone, inside zone from going or under center. You can run all the power counter stuff, all that stuff. Hubbard, to me, doesn't always see all that stuff well. I think he needs, the concept simplified a little bit. So I think that's part of the problem you're going to run into with him. And then as a pass catcher, like Abdullah is probably a little bit better, but Hubbard can do it enough that I don't know that Abdullah is going to like completely take everything away from him. So I would still probably expect Hubbard to get enough volume that he's going to be fantasy relevant. I just kind of don't love him as a player, I think. Especially right now, the issue is also like the Panthers' offensive line is even worse than they were a couple months ago. Like they're just down a bunch of dudes, and they already weren't very good.
Don't I know it? It's a pretty bad situation. A wrinkle with this too is the fact that Cam Newton, like independent of him having a really bad week in week 12, he's already been named the starter for the next game. By the way, the Panthers are on bye in week 13, so the next game is going to be in week 14 for the team, which also should probably influence maybe a discounted bid on Hubbard or on Abdullah or whoever you're targeting in this offense. But with Cam, I mean, like he's going to probably be taking 50% of the goal line work here anyway. So you're kind of dicing up a small pie. That with McCaffrey, it's fine. As McCaffrey is going to be getting 8 to 10 targets a game when he's in there. That's going to buoy his fantasy numbers, especially in a PPR type of format. But if Hubbard is a little bit less talented as a receiver than Abdullah is, he's maybe not going to get the touchdown work that you would expect because Cam Newton's in there. What does that really leave from a fantasy perspective? Are we going to be getting a lot of 15 carries for 45 yards and then nothing else? Because, Rex Burkhead is probably on the wire for free. So like, are we getting an upgrade here with Hubbard, or are we maybe banking on continued development since he's a rookie and since maybe the Panthers may prioritize looking toward the future at this point?
I mean, truthfully, I think the offensive line is probably just too bad for him to like get chances to really develop. Like they just can't run block right at this point. So I think really what you're betting on is, like you mentioned, like the touchdown work is probably not going to be there because Cam is going to take a lot of that, of course. Yeah. And if we assume Abdullah takes even half of the receiving work, that's going to be a problem. Obviously, that wasn't an issue for McCaffrey because McCaffrey's just better. Yeah. You're kind of just hoping that among those 15 carries that Hubbard hits a 30-yard home run, which is like he can do that because he's really explosive. It's just you're kind of flipping a coin and hoping for the best.
Yeah, I mean, and it sounds from what you're saying like Hubbard doesn't really have much of a future as a fantasy asset. Like he's not going to someday be the lead back on a team. Is that something that you would feel?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, he's kind of to me like a worse version of Antonio Gibson, who is also like a really explosive runner, kind of a high runner, but doesn't always see things particularly well. Gibson is just like an even better athlete, and I think a little bit more comfortable running between the tackles. So that's kind of what I see. I have issues with Hubbard being like a legitimate number one.
Yeah, I mean, gotta say, things not looking great for my Carolina Panthers. I made the joke on Twitter that luckily for the Panthers, McCaffrey, they can cut him and only lose $18 million in dead cap after next season. So,
oh Jesus,
things looking really bright in their future right now. Hate to see it, but I got to say, from a fantasy perspective, if Hubbard's not going to be a really awesome target for you, maybe you lose out on Mattison. Players probably that roster. Dalvin Cook may already have him on the rosters. You're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel at this point. I think we should probably talk about Phillip Lindsay for the Dolphins. He got picked up last week after I can't remember if he was released or maybe picked up off of waivers from the Texans, but either way, he did play in his first game with the team, had 12 carries for 42 yards, but they were actually playing the Panthers and built a pretty substantial lead early. Were able to run the ball a lot. Myles Gaskin actually had more carries, 16 for 49 and 2 touchdowns on the day. So this may be less about Lindsay's current role with the team because Gaskin looks like he's still primarily the lead back and more involved in the receiving game. But I didn't know if you had any thoughts about whether Lindsay could maybe build toward more with the new team as he gets more involved. Do you think that he could maybe steal some of the early down work and end up being more the Hubbard type of workload that we would expect for the Panthers for the Dolphins and maybe relegate Gaskin to more of a receiving back workload? Is that a possibility in your mind?
Maybe, and it's only kind of because of the specific offense that they run, which to me is disgusting. I hate their like whole RPO, like all we do is run screens and like it's just a disgusting offense. However, if you're going to have a runner in those RPO situations, because you're like gaming the numbers count up front, you can probably get away with a guy who is a little bit more explosive and just hope that if you have to hand the ball off to him, he can kind of expose a lighter box count because the linebacker goes out to play the slant route or whatever the hell he's doing. And Lindsay might be better. Lindsay could be better for that than Gaskin is. He's more explosive. That's kind of what Lindsay does. I just don't think Lindsay is a very, good runner when he has to come up on contact, which Gaskin is a little bit better at. So that would be the only reason I think that this could work out. But I'm kind of just out on Lindsay in general as a player at this point. So I would be kind of not too excited about that happening.
So, I mean, the full season metrics for Lindsay look really, really bad. It's 2.7 yards per carry, 30.2% rushing success rate. That's the lowest among running backs with 50 or more carries this season. But I'll mention that like David Johnson is the second lowest at 33.9%. I don't think it's a coincidence that those two players are both on the Texans. The Texans have 3.06 adjusted line yards. That's easily the worst in football. Dolphins are second worst, though, 3.53. It's like these are probably the two worst run blocking teams in football. And while I would generally say that Lindsay seems like somebody that good blocking would really benefit, I don't know if maybe there was anything with the even subtle improvements from the Texans to Dolphins that might help him. Lindsay has a very extreme split toward yards before contact versus yards after contact, 1.8 versus 0.7 this season. And like with what you were talking about with the RPOs, just like the fact that Tua would be making a read that hopefully would eliminate the first defender, does that like open the door for more yards before contact where Lindsay can get to full speed and maybe turn the corner in a way that Gaskin can't? I feel like that's something that you were kind of teasing toward here, but is it possible that Lindsay would be a good fit with the scheme, even if it doesn't really seem like the personnel around him is really improving that dramatically?
Yeah, I think it should help because like, if you're if Tua's like reading a linebacker and the linebacker goes out to play the flat route or slant route, whatever it is that they're reading off of, whoever the offensive line is like double teaming to climb, they don't have to climb to a linebacker anymore. There's nobody there. So you kind of get a little bit more push initially, which I think to your point is going to be able to help a player like Lindsay potentially get to the second level before he has to meet contact. And then maybe you just hope he beats an angle or actually makes somebody miss in space. But again, this is still not a very good run blocking offensive line. And even though they try to do all this RPO stuff, they're still not a good offensive line. So I still kind of have my concerns.
The other wrinkle here is that the bigger back, Malcolm Brown, has been on IR for a few weeks, I believe with a quad injury. He could be activated as soon as this week as well. And so, like, I don't know if we're kind of tumbling toward a three-back committee. I guess Salvin Ahmed was involved last week as well. So, like, there's kind of a lot of players involved, and this could get a little Jetsy in, which you don't want to see from a fantasy perspective. But, like, does Brown figure into the equation at all for you? Like, how much is it important that you would have a bigger back? Because both Gaskin and Lindsay are both pretty slight. And so it seems to me like maybe he would be involved for like third and short type of situations, but is there more to it than that too?
If they want to commit to an actual like run game that is not just based off of all these RPOs, I think Brown is probably better because, kind of to your point, he's going to be a little bit better in like third and short situations, inside the 10. He's going to be better if he has to like actually fight through contact at the line of scrimmage or something like that. So that could factor into, but I think to your point, like it wouldn't be like he just comes in and takes over like the starting role or anything. It would be this weird like 3 or 4-headed backfield where like potentially none of these players are relevant outside of, a random Gaskin 2-score game, which he's had multiple of this year, which is just really odd to me.
Yeah, like you wouldn't necessarily think he would be the heavy red zone player. And in fact, like I think he split the close in touches pretty evenly with Salvin Ahmed last game, but he's the one that found the end zone the last few weeks. It kind of reminds me a bit of Washington, where J.D. McKissick keeps like scoring all these touchdowns.
Dude, last night was like
just like losing their minds about Antonio Gibson. He had like 28 carries, but McKissick had both the touchdowns. It's really funny. Since we have a little bit of time with the episode today, can you get a little bit more into like the broader Dolphins offense? Like, the RPO stuff I know was traditionally a college thing, and I think that's kind of what made Tua so successful in college. Like, what about it is disgusting to you from an NFL perspective? Like, you could say that it's working. I mean, the Dolphins have won 4 straight games, but maybe I'm getting the sense that you think that may not be the reason for the recent turn of good fortune, right?
It's just like dishonorable football. Like, I just don't like it, dude. Like, you should not be able to. Because the problem too is like, so in college specifically, the reason it works a lot more in college is you can climb to, I think, like 3 yards before you get called for ineligible man downfield. In the NFL, it's only 1. The problem is I still don't think they call it as much as they should. And that kind of allows some teams to get away with it the way that they do. My issue is also one that like they throw off of those RPOs a lot more than other teams do. Like the Cardinals and like the Eagles also run a lot more RPOs, but they'll hand the ball off a lot more, which for whatever reason to me is like less frustrating to watch. And then my other issue is just like the rest of their passing offense. They just don't have like a very interesting drop back game. Like a lot of their other stuff that they do is like they're just hitting like wide receiver screens. They're throwing a slant route. They're like picking people at the line of scrimmage, or Jalen Waddle is running like an over route. Like that's the entire passing offense. And to your point, like it's kind of working right now because their skill players, at least their pass catchers, are actually pretty good. Like I think they have a really good pass catching unit. The offensive line and running backs just are not very good. And Tua is honestly like good at these RPO reads, and he's pretty accurate on them. So like it is working. I think it's just like a brand of football that is really, really annoying to watch. And I don't think has like long-term sustainability. Like I don't think you can be a top 10 offense doing what they're doing. I just don't think it's possible.
Well, like how much of it though is the decision limited by the personnel? Like if they had better players, would they be doing more stuff with Tua? Or do you think that sort of Tua has the personal limitations that may be leading to a really pared down type of offense here?
I think it's definitely both. I think Tua, like, I don't think in the NFL he's ever really shown he's that comfortable as a drop back passer yet. I think he's proven he's really, really a lot more comfortable on like these RPO and play action stuff. So I think it's partly him. I also do think like the offensive line is very bad, and like they are not a good like true drop back pass set type of offensive line. They just don't have the personnel to do that. So I do think if they had a better offensive line, they would be able to do some more legit drop back stuff. I also think if Tua was better, they could do more of it. So I don't really think it's like the receivers, though. I think that receiving core could do whatever they wanted it to do. I think a lot of it is just Tua's limitations mixed with an offensive line that is just, they need some help with the RPO stuff.
Makes sense. We're getting more questions in both on Facebook and YouTube, which appreciate you guys watching us. Again, we're live Monday through Friday, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to hit all those questions, but we're going to hold them to the end of the show so we can get through all of our waiver wire stuff and some of the tight end rookie discussion we're going to get to. Derrik, let's head to the next waiver wire option. It's D'Onta Foreman, running back for the Titans, a player that we've mentioned a little bit. I think I was on Adrian Peterson first and then kind of jumped to Foreman. And the natural inclination maybe to jump to Dontrell Hilliard at this point. He had the best fantasy day of the week last Sunday, 12 carries, 131 yards and a touchdown. But my read of things is that was kind of buoyed by a 68-yard breakout touchdown. Foreman was getting more working and getting more of the early down work. And I've been like very pleased with his rushing success percentage. 59.5% is sixth highest among running backs with 40 plus carries. To me, what that's saying is that even though he's maybe not bringing the same level of explosive plays that maybe Hilliard could bring, he's consistently staying ahead of the sticks, really doing what Henry could do for the Titans. And I feel like he's probably the choice they're going to stick with more on the early downs that can kind of help his value from a fantasy perspective. But what do you think here, both about Foreman, about what the Titans might do, especially with, after their week 13 bye, they may get Jeremy McNichols back and we could be back at another three back committee. So what are your thoughts here with the Titans?
I think I'm for sure out on Hilliard, because kind of to your point, like the reason he had a bigger day is, he kind of just got lucky on like I think it was like a 3rd and 3 like draw play where obviously New England was like not in a very heavy personnel. They were trying to play the pass, which truthfully they had been doing all day. And I'll talk about that a little bit more with Foreman, but like, Hilliard just kind of got like a lucky little crease and bounced through the safety. So I don't think that's like a consistent, you can't bank on that play every week. That 3rd and 3 draw usually doesn't do that. So I don't think that's going to be consistent. With Foreman, I still kind of have my concerns. I think a big reason that they were able to do what they did this past Sunday against New England is like New England played their defense in such a way that they wanted Ryan Tannehill to beat them. They went to some more like lighter formations, lighter personnel, a lot of like too high stuff. They were really forcing Ryan Tannehill to beat them. And he couldn't. Like he had like 4.5 yards in an attempt or something insane. So obviously they gave up a lot in the ground game that way. But we also saw like Belichick kind of do this against the Chargers. And like that's just kind of what they're willing to do with some of these teams where they know the passing game has to beat them. So I think to me it was more of just like a very specific game plan thing from the Patriots mixed with like a couple of lucky runs that they were able to get in. So I still kind of have my concerns.
So I'm confused by one thing. Like D'Onta Foreman has 3.19 yards before contact per attempt. That's the 4th highest among running backs with his volume of carries so far this season. When I see that, I'm thinking two things. One, I'm thinking, does he have elite speed? Like this year, not counting, Phillip Lindsay is a frequent leader of yards before contact. Some of the speedy 49ers types like Raheem Mostert consistently win in that. Foreman is not that. I mean, he's like 240 pounds. He's kind of more of a bruiser. The other thing I expect to see is like really good run blocking from the offensive line, but the Titans are 23rd with 4.05 adjusted line yards. So I'm like, I don't really know how it is that Foreman is doing so well before contact. Are you seeing anything there from a scouting perspective, or are we kind of just running into trying to slice up, 40 odd carries and trying to draw conclusions from it?
I think the sample size is the problem because, like, especially if you watch this past game, there was one like Foreman play where they actually had like a really good pitch to the outside, and it was kind of just like a situation of like they caught the Patriots were playing like their corners way off because the Titans had like a really tight formation. So usually when you do that, the corners are going to play off and high. And the Titans like pitched off of that, and it was just like they caught the Patriots in a really bad play call, and Foreman just got like 1 billion yards before contact because he just got the edge for free. So stuff like that is part of it. I also think like, if half of his carries were from this game, that is going to have, that's going to kind of skew the sample size a little bit. Cause like, even with, I mentioned like the lighter personnel, lighter formations was part of the problem for New England. I also think linebacker Juwan Bentley played his worst game of the season. He's been really, really good all year, but he was getting just climbed on the second level every time. There was one where Nate Davis just like put him into the ground. Like, I think the Titans just got like a really lucky and like fortunate day. And Foreman's, yards before contact stats kind of benefited from that.
That makes sense. And I feel like the Patriots, Christian Barmore, interior defenders, really stand out rookie guy. I mean, he's playing hurt at the moment, and I feel like maybe that was an influencer too. But I think that kind of all adds up to something here, which is that despite the success, both from an efficiency standpoint and the fantasy success, I'm not sure Foreman is like a dramatically great target from a fantasy perspective. Again, I had him as a 7% FAB bid. You're running out of guys that maybe you're worth even spending the money on. But yeah, it's kind of a tough situation here. Shout out Benjamin Robinson, a friend of ours. He put in another question that we'll get to a little bit later. But let's keep going with some of these waiver wire guys, Derrik. We're down under 5% for me here. Not bringing up Taysom Hill. I think you could spend more on him, but I think you're probably sick of talking about how much you dislike him, even though he still isn't even playing. But maybe he'll play this week. But let's move to the Rams here with wide receiver Van Jefferson. Odell Beckham is pretty much rostered in every format at this point, but Jefferson's still available in more than half of both ESPN and Yahoo leagues. And even though he's less of the star power, I feel like the Rams are so concentrated in the receivers that they have right now that maybe all three of them can have value. So with guys like Tutu Atwell, Ben Skowronek, I can't even say that guy's name. They're all hurt. Robert Woods is out for the year. That Cooper Kupp played 100% of snaps. Van Jefferson played 98%, and Odell Beckham, even kind of hurt, was playing 98% of snaps last week. So I mean, you can't really play more than every snap at this point. And while Jefferson has had some kind of extreme type of games, including 3 catches on 9 targets this week, but the big touchdown catch, it's kind of like, is there really much here? I'll say there are 2 things that kind of point to me that he may have fantasy value. One, his target share has really increased from a 13% rate weeks 1 to 6 to 18% since week 7. So that's even before some of those other Rams injuries, suggesting he's kind of trending in the right direction there. 2, he's got 3.8 expected touchdowns since week 7. That's the second most among wide receivers behind just Jamar Chase. That's kind of a shocking number to me. Like, I know he had scored twice in the period, but still has a pretty unlucky shortfall there. Is there anything there with Jefferson? Like, is he a guy that's going to start scoring more touchdowns? Is it just like, hey, this is a pretty good offense and they're running out of guys to target? What are your thoughts with everything going on here with the Rams?
I mean, I think Van's a pretty good player. And like the reason I think they picked up Odell Beckham to do what they did with the offense, even though they already had Woods and Kupp and Jefferson, was like, I think they were just trying to make a great thing special. Like, I think if they just stuck with those 3 and didn't pick up OBJ, they would have been fine. It's just obviously when you can get a star power like Odell Beckham, you do it. But I think Jefferson is like a really good player and would be a starter on pretty much every other team in the league. I think he's a phenomenal route runner. He's really clean. His dad, I think, is the receivers coach in Arizona. So that kind of makes a lot of sense of that. His thing is just like he's not particularly explosive off the line or out of his breaks, which is weird because he actually has like pretty good long speed. So he's kind of like a funky blend of skills. But I don't know. I think he understands how to get in and out of his routes really well. He understands how to keep himself clean. And I think the way he sees the ball in, whether it's through contact or on the boundary, trying to make a weird catch, I think his hands are really good and they're really strong. So I think that's part of why he's been a little bit of a red zone target for them too. So I don't know. I think he can do a little bit of everything for this offense, and he's probably never going to get the volume that Kupp is going to get, but I don't know. He can, we've seen he can hit these explosive plays. I mean, I think he had one in like week 1 or 2 as well. So like, I don't know. He can have these big games, and I think he's a pretty consistent red zone target.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of on topic. I feel like we kind of need to unpack Odell Beckham to really understand Jefferson's opportunities from a fantasy perspective. So let's go ahead and answer Benjamin Robinson's question, which is, what do we think of the Rams' performance against the Packers? I assume he means specifically Odell Beckham Jr.'s usage. I mentioned that he played pretty much every play, despite maybe dealing with a little bit of a back injury. But the thing that stands out to me here is that, like, while the names are still big, like going from Robert Woods to Odell Beckham, it's like it's gotten probably more famous, right? But the skill sets of these receivers has changed a lot toward more of the downfield type of big play receivers, right? And less of the versatile, able to block really well type of players. It seems like that's shifting the Rams offense away from one it's kind of more run based to more of like a deep play action based offense. Like what are your thoughts there? And do you think does that make Jefferson a good fit for what's going on here with Matthew Stafford?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that really hurts Jefferson at all because, like I said, I think he's really consistent the way he gets in and out of his breaks, and I think his hands are pretty good. So if they're going to be this like targeting the 12 to 20 yard area all the time, I think he's tough enough that he can make a lot of those catches. And then we have obviously seen he can take the top off a little bit. I think the problem that they've had in the past few weeks is like, I think the reports of Stafford not being healthy, like I believe him. Like that, yeah. Like Stafford has always been good for like a couple of weird misses every now and then. Like even when he was playing at like an MVP level in 2019 or whatever, like he's always kind of been good for a couple of those. But like he was sailing everything in this last game, and that's just like he's clearly something's not right. So I think if he can get healthy over the next couple of weeks, I think what they have with this 3-headed receiver core is really special, and probably all of them are going to be able to have big fantasy days, just kind of depending on what the defense gives them. Like, yeah. I think all 3 of them are capable, and it's kind of just whatever defensive coordinators want to take away.
I mean, I generally agree, but I will say I'm getting concerned about Stafford's health because it seems like he's had back issues the last few years. It's not just this year. And I think he had a bunch of like microfractures in his back maybe 2 years ago. And I just don't really feel like that's something that's going to get healthier the more he's playing and getting hit at this point. So I do feel like some of this could kind of fall apart on you down the stretch. But for a player like Jefferson that's available on the wire, like I think it's a good bet to go and get him at maybe an inexpensive, waiver price. But I don't know, like I'm not sure I would want to be all in on like Odell Beckham. You can't really say that about Kupp because of the volume that he's getting, but it seems like this could be trending in the wrong direction. So I don't really know what to make of it in that sense. All right, I kind of teased this earlier, Derek, but we got to talk about your guy, Rex Burkhead, running back for the Houston Texans. Just explosion of work the last couple of weeks. 30 carries is tied for 9th most among running backs the last 2 weeks. The broader question might be, what exactly are the Texans doing? They've cycled through Mark Ingram, who they ended up getting rid of. They traded him to the Saints. I can't remember whether they waived Phillip Lindsay to the Dolphins or whether they released him, but whatever. But from a fantasy perspective, it seems good that like you're down to a 2-back committee now where Burkhead played 61% of snaps on Sunday, and Ingram never played more than 46%. Lindsay never more than 26%. It's with the clarity, you can maybe squeeze a little bit of fantasy value out of this, at least from a deeper format. But like, what are the Texans doing, do you think?
I honestly don't know what they're doing with their offense. And I think like it does not matter if this is Rex Burkhead or Nick Chubb behind this offensive line. Like I am very much a guy, like I do think running backs matter. They can make good offensive lines great. They can make bad offensive lines okay, like we've seen with Najee Harris in Pittsburgh. But like this Texans offensive line is actually so bad that it is unfixable by even Walter Payton. Like these guys cannot block anything. And like you mentioned earlier, they're like worst in adjusted line yards by like half a yard.
Yeah. It was like very low threes.
Yeah, like it's not even close. I wouldn't even be surprised if it's like one of the worst marks that Football Outsiders has ever had in their database at that. So I don't think it even matters what the Texans are trying to do at running back. And nobody is going to be able to produce behind this line, I don't think.
Yeah, I should have pulled the numbers for Burkhead because I mentioned that Lindsay was last in rushing success rate. David Johnson was second last. You got to feel like Burkhead's in that mix too. He had 27 yards on his 12 carries. So that's, about a yard and a half or 2.5 yards per carry. It's not really a great situation. From a fantasy perspective, again, it is promising that he's getting the majority of the work now, because he did add 3 catches for 27 yards. And if he's getting 3 to 5 targets a week, you can maybe kind of work your way into the flex range. But it just seems like the situation is really pretty untenable here, that it's not going to really drive much from a fantasy perspective, right? Okay, well, then let's just keep going. I don't really want to talk about the Texans too much more than we have to.
I don't think anyone wants to hear about it either.
to the bastion of success that is the Detroit Lions, where sadly, DeAndre Swift ended up suffering a shoulder sprain on Thanksgiving, and it seems like he's probably week to week. I suspect he's going to miss at least 1, maybe 2 weeks with that. And Jamaal Williams got pretty much a featured workload in his absence, 15 carries and 5 catches. I think we can probably safely assume that this is really a short-term potential addition. I'm suggesting just a 3% FAB bid, but can Jamaal Williams maybe make an impact in the short term if Swift ends up missing a couple of games?
I actually really like Jamaal Williams. I mean, he's just a really hard runner. He's tough. I think his vision, especially on inside the tackle stuff, is really impressive. Obviously not a guy who's explosive. That's why they give, more touches to DeAndre Swift, especially in the passing game. But Williams is still capable enough in the passing game. Like, he can catch passes, check downs out of the backfield and get something out of them. And like, he can pass protect. So like, I don't know. I really like the floor that Williams brings to the offense. Is kind of just a matter of like, are the Lions going to be in games for long enough for him to get carries and stuff? That's kind of the real issue. But I mean, I think as a player, I trust him. And I think the Lions offensive line is like decent enough that, he can have some decent days if they can actually, stay into a game, which again, that's the real issue.
Well, I mean, their upcoming schedule, it's kind of a mixed bag, I would say. Their next 3 opponents are the Vikings, the Broncos, and the Cardinals. And I mean, it's obvious that those 3 teams are better than the Lions, because every team's better than the Lions. But there's an interesting split here where all 3 of those teams are much better defending the pass than the run. The Vikings are 27th in DVOA run defense, 8th against the pass. The Broncos are 28th and 17th, and the Cardinals are 14th and 4th. Not sure he'll get to the Cardinals game as the featured guy, but like, it's a possibility there that the Lions may kind of rely a little bit more heavily on the run in an attempt to take advantage of a defensive weakness for however long that might last. What are your thoughts on Jermar Jefferson, the late round rookie? Like, he ended up missing a little bit of time in the midseason, but it seemed from a scouting perspective like he was kind of a zone type of runner. And like, those are the guys that tend to get missed on in the draft, where they could pop as a 5th, 6th, or 7th round guy like Jefferson is. Like, is there any potential for him to get involved here? Maybe not from a short-term fantasy perspective, but like, maybe he could end up being something in the long term.
He's very much like a zone runner who's going to consistently pick his right spot. His contact balance is pretty good. I mean, he had like a fairly long run 3-4 weeks ago or something like that, where he had like kind of ran through a tackle a little bit. So, I mean, he can kind of do that stuff. It's just, to me, like, at this juncture in his career, he kind of just feels like a little bit lesser version of what Jamaal Williams is giving you. So I can't imagine that he's ever going to like outsnap Jamaal Williams or anything, but I think it's entirely possible that he could be a decent player for them. And if he has to play while Swift is still out of the lineup, he can probably produce a decent amount. It's just, again, if we already have concerns about Williams getting enough workload because the Lions can't stay in games, Jamar Jefferson, even if he's a decent player, is also probably not going to get a decent enough workload. So that's really my issue with pretty much everyone in this offense, rather than how good they are.
Absolutely. All right. One more guy, one more great team that we're going to talk about here. Laviska Shenault, wide receiver for the Jaguars. We're down in the 1% FAB range at this point. So this is probably more of a deeper league option than it is in a shallower format. But I do think it's encouraging. Like, there was a tweet from Adam Levitan that I'm going to quote here that Shenault, he played 41 of his 53 snaps last week from the slot. And that's a relevant concern because, like, he started the season as a slot receiver, but then he ended up shifting to the outside when outside receiver DJ Chark got injured. And that's why Shenault didn't pick up the targets like we expected through the middle part of the season. Really, Jamal Agnew was the one getting a little bit more involved there. But then Agnew ended up injuring his hip in week 11 and is now out for the rest of the season. And it looks like Shenault is switching back to the inside. The Jaguars are kind of running out of bodies in any sense, but like, could the move back maybe influence a PPR type of renaissance here for Shenault, a player that was drafted in the top 40 among receivers in PPR formats in the preseason? Like, could he get back to that level through the closing stretch of the year?
I mean, I think it's actually possible because, for as critical as I've been about Shenault, I think a lot of his issues are like exacerbated by being an outside receiver. Like I just don't think he's a very natural route runner. His hands are kind of whatever to me. He's a guy who you kind of have to immediately get the ball in his hands. And I think from the slot, that is a lot more, accessible if the offense actually knows what they're doing, because you can run a lot more of those like quick hitting routes over the middle, or, that can more obviously be your like jet motion guy if you want to, keep your outside receivers locked in where they are. And I think you can throw like a lot of bubble screens and stuff if that's your slot receiver. Hopefully this honestly also means that he gets more work in the backfield, because I think like if you can have him get the ball without running a route, that's great. That's the way to use him. So, but overall, I actually kind of do like the move back to slot, even if I'm not high on him as a player. I think it's just obviously like where he just more naturally should be playing.
Yeah, Benjamin Robinson mentions the Jaguars need to draft a wide receiver badly, and I would say put it on the list with a lot of other positions at this point. Luckily, they've got a quarterback, I guess we hope. Harry Wolf asks, are we doing questions yet? We're going to hold off on the questions just a little bit longer so we can do a tight end rookie review, but we'll circle back to the questions in probably 10 or 15 minutes. But Derrik, we've done this for quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs, but for tight ends, there are really not a lot of guys to talk about here. So I think we're probably focusing on Kyle Pitts and Pat Freiermuth. For Pitts, like, it's hard not to feel disappointed because it seemed like he was an historically great type of draft prospect. But I will say that 661 yards has him on pace for 10,000 or 1,050, not 10,000. That'd be a lot. Is it disappointing because he has just one touchdown? To me, like from a fantasy sense, maybe that's the ticket. And I'll say that he does have 3.7 expected touchdowns this season. His 2.7 touchdown shortfall is the biggest among tight ends. He's had 17 red zone targets, 4 end zone targets. So it seems like the workload is there. What do you think of Pitts, the player, so far in his NFL career?
I mean, I still think he's every bit as good as a prospect as we thought he was. I think he just feels disappointing because, to your point, I think the touchdown, fortune has not quite been there. Yeah. The Falcons also just suck. Like, I know they're 5-6 and they're like still technically in the hunt, but I think everybody knows that they're a bad team. And they're just not really one that's like very interesting. I think especially on offense, they've had so many issues that like losing Cordero Patterson was like detrimental to the way the offense functions, which is like insane. That shouldn't be possible in 2021. So I think it's really just kind of a matter of circumstance for him. But I think as a player, he's incredibly special. He's obviously like the epitome of what we think of when we think of wide receivers who can play at receiver. He's a guy who can play both from like the big slot and do a lot of those crossers and stuff, but you can also legitimately flex him out as like your X receiver, run him on go balls, curls, digs, whatever. Like he has everything open to him as a receiver, and then he can still block. Like they have other tight ends who are better at that. Like I think like Lee Smith and stuff like that are better blockers, but like you put him on the line and he can still do it. He's very willing to do it. And honestly, that's something I imagine will be even better for him moving forward, as he gets a couple more years in a strength program, because he's still like a very young player. So I imagine he's still going to get bigger and stronger in that sense. So I don't know. He's everything that I think we hoped he was. And to me, like the most impressive part of what he does is he might have some of the best hand-eye coordination I've ever seen. Like tight end, receiver, cornerback, don't care. Like the way he can manipulate his body to like get to passes anywhere is like, it doesn't make sense for someone who's 6'6". It's just unbelievable. So, I mean, I ranted a lot, but like he's just a really special player.
No, I mean, I would say the fullness of the route tree point that you made, that does show up in the metrics too. He's got 16.7 air yards per catchable target. That's the second highest among tight ends with 25 or more targets. 13.8 yards per catchable target is the highest among those tight ends. So like when the ball is coming out and getting to him with, the potential to be caught, he's putting up some massive numbers. So like it really shows more like a wide receiver type of trait. We'll compare that to what Pat Freiermuth is doing in a second, a much more traditional tight end, I would say. And it's night and day. It's just like, again, the offensive line is bad. There's not a lot of receiving talent, especially with Calvin Ridley stepped away from the game right now to like complement and take away focus of defenses away from him. So it's like, it's not a good situation, but I would say all the peripheral numbers point to this guy being as advertised. And I would say pretty clearly the number one tight end from a dynasty perspective in fantasy formats. But let's move into Pat Freiermuth. Unfortunately, I think he suffered a concussion in week 12, so he may be out a week or so here, hopefully not. But like broadly speaking, he's had a ton of success in recent weeks. He's had a 17.2% target share since week 6. That's the week Juju Smith-Schuster went out for the season. That's the 11th highest among tight ends, tied with Mike Gesicki, which I think might surprise people. People think of him as being a top 8 or so fantasy tight end at this point. Freiermuth also 5 touchdowns since week 6. That's tied for the most with Hunter Henry, 3.6 expected, second behind Hunter Henry. So like a lot of those usage type of numbers, both broadly and in the red zone, are pointing in the right direction. But similar question here to Pitts. Like, what do you think of Freiermuth, the player, so far?
Freiermuth, like, so Pitts is obviously the better player overall, but like Pitts is more a little bit in like the modern tight end role where he is more of a receiver, even though you can put him on the line and stuff. Freiermuth is like a legit old school wide tight end. Like that dude can block. They can put him, straight on the line of scrimmage. They can move him into the backfield a little bit in like a wing spot. They can flex him out into the slot, like especially when they go empty. They like to do that because it obviously gives Ben like a big body right over the middle of the field, especially in the short area, which is obviously where Big Ben can only really target at this point in his career, which I think is why some of Freiermuth's numbers are what they are, because like Ben just doesn't have juice to really do a whole lot more than that. So, but I don't know. I really like the way that Freiermuth can box people out. I think his hands are fantastic. It's why he's such a good red zone target for them. So I don't know. I think he's just a guy who is maybe not going to have some of those 30-yard gains across the field that like Pitts or Waller or Gesicki can do. But I think he's going to be such a good, consistent 8 to 12, yards for your offense whenever you need it, whenever they find a quarterback who can do that a little bit better.
Yeah. So I mentioned that Kyle Pitts, 16.7 air yards per catchable target. Freiermuth is 6.7. So 10 yards lower. And I don't think that's all Ben Roethlisberger. Like, I know that he can't get the ball down the field, but I think that kind of tells you who Freiermuth is. Another interesting split here is 2.3 total plus minus is 6th best among tight ends with 25 or more targets. So that's telling you like he's catching balls at a higher rate given the depth of those throws than you would expect from other tight ends. But negative 1.15 yards after the catch plus per catchable target is second lowest. So like I would say this is a guy that you expect 0 drops, but 0 broken tackles from in a season, right? Like I'm getting kind of Greg Olsen-y vibes, which again is it's a great player, but like it's a very specific type of player. It's not a Kyle Pitts type of guy, but like, can somebody with that skill set be a top 10 fantasy tight end? I say yes, because I mean, Greg Olsen was that all the time. It's really more a question of how much his offense is relying on him. But do you see it sort of the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like he's not going to have some of those fun, explosive plays that some of the true elite guys can have. But there's not that many great tight ends anyway. So if you can be this guy who is always going to be able to catch the ball, and be the red zone threat that we think of when we think of tight ends, and be a blocker, like you're going to be one of the top 8 or 10 guys pretty consistently, just by virtue of there just aren't that many guys who can do the explosive stuff. There's only like 3 or 4 at a given time. So
absolutely. I mean, we were trying to come up with names in the pre-show meeting about Brevin Jordan's been playing a little bit. Tommy Tremble on the field a lot for the Panthers, but not seeing a lot of targets. Is there anybody else here that's even worth talking about? I mean, we say this in fantasy all the time, but most of these tight ends need 2 or 3 seasons to really make an impact anyway. But that's where we are with everybody else from this draft class, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Like I would be excited about Tremble in the future, just in the sense of like he's a really good and willing blocker, so he's going to be on the field a lot, and you just hope that with a couple of years of development, he can be a little bit better of a pass catcher. But like he's probably also not going to be like a star or anything. So like it's probably just the 2 guys, Pitts and Freiermuth, and then maybe you get like a decent low end, tight end one way down the line. But I don't know who it would even be really.
Yeah. All right. Well, that covers the content we aim to play today. Let's go through all of the questions that we've gotten through. Again, we are live Monday through Friday, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time, YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, or Twitter. So send us in all your questions. We'll get to them at the end of shows, just like this. Let's go with Clap Nuts. Classy name here. He's asking we should start 2 among Cooks, Gallup, Ayuk, and Beasley in a full PPR format. I'll say some injuries are potentially influencing here. I think both Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb are going to return to the Cowboys this week. And for me, that kind of relegates Gallup to more of the 3rd to 4th option on the team and is going to be kind of more of a deeper league option. I don't think he's your guy there. I mentioned 2, Deebo Samuel, I think is going to miss a week or 2. I'm blanking on exactly what it was that the injury was. Was it a hamstring? I don't know. But either way, Ayuk was already trending really positively. The snap shares were over 90% in recent weeks. He was getting a ton more targets. Like, I think he was probably a top 30 or so receiver even before Samuel got injured. But now that Samuel's going to be out, I feel like Aiyuk could be like maybe a top 20 guy in the short term. I know he's not necessarily your favorite player, Derek, but given the potential for a role increase with Samuel out, like, do you see Aiyuk maybe having some short-term fantasy success?
Yeah, I'm rolling with Aiyuk out of this group for sure.
Yeah.
Not again, like I still think he's kind of a limited player in what you can ask him to do, but they are very good at the things that he can do. That offense is, and the offense is rolling. Like they really look like one of the better offenses in the league right now. And if we assume that can keep up, I think Aiyuk is obviously going to be a beneficiary of that, especially for however long Samuel is out. About who to pick for the other one. I guess Cooks, just because like by virtue of volume in that passing offense, I
think he's still top 10 in target share on the season. Now, he may be a little bit banged up, but if he's playing, I think it's him. Because with Beasley, I know I've explained before, it's not always as obvious about who's going to be playing and getting a lot of targets week to week with the Bills, but I think that he's got a pretty substantial split. When Dawson Knox is healthy, Beasley's getting a lot less work this season. And now that Knox is back, he had 2 touchdowns last Thursday night. I just don't think Beasley's somebody that belongs in your typical type of lineups, even in a full PPR league. So I think it's Aiyuk and Cooks, assuming that both of them are healthy and ready to go. Let's go next to Anthony Price. He's asking, should I start Mac Jones against the Bills defense? My answer is probably no. So I was a little bit surprised by this, but in my projections last week, Mac Jones was like my last rated quarterback. And then when you're kind of digging in and looking at it, I know he had 300 yards last week, but it's like most weeks it's in like the 210 to 220 range. And it's like Mac Jones is good. He's going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. Like, I would be thrilled if I were the Patriots and had him as my next quarterback. But like, that's not leading to fantasy success right now because this is a run-oriented offense. Jones isn't throwing a ton down the field. It's probably not going to be scoring a lot of touchdowns. So to me, this is a much better real life player than fantasy player. I don't really want to mess with the Bills defense with him. Do you feel any differently there?
I mean, if anything, I would be really excited about any of the Patriots running backs against this Bills defense. Yeah. I mean, I know the Bills have like a really high DVOA against the run, but like I think part of that is because they're consistently getting ahead in games and they have like a good 2 deep of players up front, so they can kind of get away with just like constantly rotating bodies. And if you're already behind the scoreboard, you don't even want to run all that much to begin with, blah, blah, blah. But I think if you're an offense that can like punch this front in the mouth, you can kind of get away with doing that. And I think that's obviously what the Patriots want to do. So I think to your point, probably more of like a 200-yard day for Mac and 150 on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the Colts follow that formula pretty effectively with Jonathan Taylor 2 weeks ago, right? So yeah, like wouldn't be stunned to see that like the Stevenson-Harris combo maybe getting 3 touchdowns this week. I think that's kind of where you're headed with that. All right, let's get to Harry Wolf. He's got a PPR trade question. He can trade Travis Kelce, Jamar Chase, and DK Metcalf for George Kittle, Tyreek Hill, and Chase Claypool. Oh, and also DJ Moore, I'm assuming. Is there another Moore that would be? Let's say it's DJ Moore. All right.
Could be Rondale or Elijah. I don't know. That one's kind of tricky.
Okay, let's try to take it one at a time. Kelce versus Kittle. I know Kittle's had a little bit more success of late, had a couple touchdowns, but I'll say by and large, he has actually scored a lot fewer touchdowns than you would expect over the course of his career. I think he's a little bit less involved as a route runner in the red zone because of how effective he is as a blocker for the 49ers. So for me, I think that's a pretty clear win for Kelce, although obviously both very good options. Jamar Chase versus Tyreek Hill, probably closer than you think, but I think Tyreek probably gets the slight nod there. So DK Metcalf his target share is like really fallen apart of late. I think he only had maybe 1 target on Monday night this last week. And Russell Wilson is obviously struggling a lot right now. Like, to me, is there something wrong with the Seahawks offense that's going to kind of maybe crater DK's value here? Or is this kind of maybe a fluke in the short term?
I'm out on the Seahawks offense until Russ looks healthy. Like, he just doesn't, he's just not, I mean, they were already kind of having issues with putting together what they wanted to do as an offense before he got hurt. And now that he's hurt, he's like in superhero mode, but he doesn't have the juice to scramble the way he used to. And also his finger is probably still bothering him. So I think, to your point, like, I think the Seahawks offense is kind of created to the point where DK's value is probably not that high. And even if the Pittsburgh offense is not very sexy, I think I would still probably prefer Claypool in that scenario.
You know how everybody used to poke fun at Baker Mayfield by saying he's what Russell Wilson would be if Wilson couldn't run?
Yeah.
Like Wilson can't really run anymore. And
now
it's
we're
like,
just,
he looks like Baker Mayfield now. Like I know everyone's going to be trying to like add him in the offseason, but I almost feel like the Seahawks might trade and get away with murder right here if they get like a hefty return for him. I'm not sure he's the player he once was, but I'm hoping I'm wrong there. But kind of back to the specifics of the question. Here's the problem. Even if DK is lost value because of the offensive struggles here, Chase Claypool is playing through turf toe right now. Just doesn't look like the same player. You mentioned that Roethlisberger can't really get the ball down the field to him. So it seems like that offense is really heavily going through Deontay Johnson, Najee Harris, and even Pat Freiermuth right now. Claypool is probably more of a back-end flex guy. And assuming that's DJ Moore, I just don't like him with Cam. Like I know the first 2 games have gone pretty well, but he had a red zone target when he had just 1 red zone target in 16 games with Cam the last season Cam played for the team before this year. And last week he had like a 70-yard, reception that was basically half the Panthers' yards. I just don't think there's going to be enough through the air in that offense to support Moore as more than like a top 30 to 40 type of receiver. Just don't think the value is really there. So in that sense, I almost feel like Metcalf has the best chance for a rebound here. Cause like Claypool, you don't expect the health to get dramatically better. The Panthers, you don't expect to move off of Cam. Maybe the finger will get better for Wilson. So all in all, it's pretty close, but I think I would probably stick with Kelsey, Jermar, and DK. Do you disagree, Derek?
No, I probably would just stick with who I have too. And like, yeah, especially if this is DJ Moore. Like, I know he caught the deep touchdown or whatever, but like,
yeah,
or not, it was almost a touchdown. But otherwise, I thought he looked horrible in that game. Like he had a couple of passes he could have caught, a couple of routes that I think he was short on. So, yeah, if it's DJ Moore, especially in this offense, I'm probably not that excited anymore.
Yeah, Harry added some extra context with his team, and I'll point out that he actually has Jalen Waddle on his team right now too. So assuming it's not like a deep starting type of roster, he can actually just start Waddle in the short term if he's worried about Metcalf. And like Metcalf is the perfect player to have on your bench, hoping that it gets better because like his upside is obviously enormous. I would say it's definitely higher than Claypool's and Moore's in the short term.
And I think Waddle's playing really well right now too, especially
definitely.
as of late.
All right, next up, Lee Shaker asks, should I trade Javonte and DK for CD Lamb, I guess? Are we just abbreviating that with a CD, or am I missing somebody here?
No, I mean, that's who I would assume it is.
Okay, cool. So, Javonte is one of my favorite players because I'll say like I think he's leading the league in avoided tackle rate right now. And I just feel like he's a future star, but you poured a little bit of cold water on that the last time we talked about him a couple of weeks ago about maybe the full skill set isn't there right now. And Melvin Gordon keeps playing great, and the Broncos keep having a pretty even split among those two players. Like, are we late enough in the year that maybe the big late season Cam Akers type of breakout isn't going to happen?
I think it's probably not going to. And honestly, at this point, I'm not even sure it's like Javonte Williams probably can be like a legitimate number one, even if some of his like vision and stuff is a little dicey to me. Mm-hmm. I think the issue is like Melvin Gordon is just playing as best. Good. He's playing as good as football as he's ever played. Like I genuinely believe he is playing that well right now. So it's kind of just more a situation of like the Broncos have 2 legitimately really good running backs rather than it's like, Williams isn't ready or something like that. So I think that's just kind of the problem that you're going to have. So I think, to your point, any breakout that's coming is probably not happening.
Yeah. So I'd say, should he trade Javonte and DK for CD Lamb? I think if he's in a shallow league, the answer is yes, because I think Lamb is clearly the best player in the deal for this year. And if you have any kind of opportunity to replace that on the waiver wire or maybe from your bench in a shallower format, I think that makes sense. All right. Ben Robinson asks, what do you make of Jarvis Landry's usage on the Browns? Is his target share sustainable, rosterable in a standard league, or half PPR or full PPR only? He still is probably only a PPR type of player because he's just not really ever getting the explosive plays, barring that really funny rushing touchdown from a couple weeks ago. But I'll say that like since Odell Beckham got released, I think it's been a really high, like a top 10, maybe top 15 type of target share. And when you kind of run down the list of options for the team at wide receiver, it's pretty bleak. I mean, you've got Donovan Peoples-Jones, a player that I think is really athletic and like a combine wow type of performer, but seems to be only really getting work as like a shot player down the field. Rashard Higgins was a healthy and active last week, which was kind of stunning to me. And I think there's probably a deeper story here because a couple of years ago when Freddie Kitchens was the coach, there was like a weird bearing in the depth chart situation that I feel like there may be some like off-field practice type of stuff. I'm just speculating, so I don't really know here, but like you're kind of running into Jamarcus Bradley and JoJo Natson world at that point, and you're like, oh, this is like, it's pretty tough. Like I know that Landry's a limited player, but there's just not a lot of other guys for this team to throw to, right? And the Browns have been trailing a little bit more this year, and they have to throw. So I feel like Landry is going to be a top 30 PPR guy.
Yeah, I think it's sustainable. I think to your point, through the lens of like they just what else are they going to go to? Like they don't have any other receivers. Like Donovan Peoples-Jones is nice, but I think to your point, he's kind of more of like a downfield guy. He can kind of win on the sideline on like back shoulders and stuff, and he can run digs every now and then. But like that's kind of all he's got in his skill set right now. And then the other guys are like, I mean, like Anthony Schwartz, who is like. Yeah, he can take the top off. He can't do anything else. So
he was out last week too.
So like
I can't remember if he suffered a concussion or what was going on, but
yeah, they just don't have dudes right now. So I mean, that's just by volume. He's probably going to be able to continue to do what he's done.
Harry Wolf asks, should he do the trade or not? I think we settled on you should keep the Travis Kelce side that I think you already have on your roster. Mm-hmm. And that wraps up the major questions. Again, thanks so much for watching us live 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern time, Monday through Friday on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch. Tomorrow, Aaron, Mike, and some other guys will be on to discuss the Ask Me Anything questions, so you guys can send them all of that. But that's going to wrap up the Waiver Wire show. Before we head out, I'll remind you again that FO Plus is on sale for 99 cents a week for annual subscribers. So check out the link, footballoutsiders.com/subscribe, or the link in the description of the show to check that out. We really appreciate it. If you want some more fantasy content, I'll be back this Friday looking at the Week 13 fantasy preview, looking at some DFS values and everything else. So look forward to talking to you then. Everybody enjoy your week.